Welcome to Elan Vital Journeys, where healing meets purpose and transformation begins from within. I'm your host, Phil Owens, veteran, guide, and founder of Elan Vital. This podcast is for those who've walked through fire and are now ready to rise. Whether you're a veteran living with PTSD, someone healing from deep trauma, or a seeker on a spiritual path, this space is for you. Here, we explore what it means to truly heal, not just survive, but transform. Through real conversations, personal stories, and insights from the edge of consciousness, we'll journey into the work of trauma, integration, altered states, spiritual growth, and the power of reclaiming your story. So take a breath, get grounded, and let's begin this journey together. Hi, everyone. Welcome, and welcome my first guest, Randy Waldman. She has been my psychotherapist for, 15 years now, maybe 20?
Thereabouts, yep.
I told somebody today, I think you're my longest relationship other than my family. Not
I'm
sure that's completely accurate, but maybe. So, yeah, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining me. So, I talked about the hero's journey in previous episodes, and so I wanted you to come in and you've seen me through most of this journey. And, the hero's journey talks about mentors and guides that come in along the way. And really, you're kind of that first one for me to help me get to where I'm at. So I wanted to bring that in and talk a little bit about that and just, talk about the power of having the therapist to lead, guide, and support. One of the things that I thought would come up, well, a couple things that I thought about as I was preparing for this. One was remembering how, when we first met, I remember kind of smoothing over my childhood. And I didn't really talk about some of the maybe abuse that took place. And it was a year or two into us meeting that I said something along the lines of, then my mom said, just wait till your father gets home. And you looked at me and said, what did that mean? And I was like, well, man, I was going to get a whipping. And you were like, wait, what? And then another thing that came up was the book. I remember we were talking and you had recommended a book, and it was something about falling apart and going to pieces. And I Googled the book and I listened to the book, and then I was like, I finished the book and it was amazing. And you're like, which book? And I told you, and you're like, okay, well, it sounds like it was the right book for you. Wasn't maybe necessarily the book you had recommended.
Well, it was
Yeah.
one of many. You were a voracious reader of every kind of spiritual material, guidance, some self-help that you could. I was very respectful and in awe of how hungry you were to learn. It took a while. Your beginning journey was not directed in that way. And the very first day that I met you, I could feel the gem of a man that you were, and I could experience all the defenses that you had over that gem of a man. And it took us a while to knock on the door of your authentic self and for you to feel brave enough to let go of some of the constructs that you had put in place of just being driven to success, etc. And so my witnessing your journey of going from the man who kind of swaggered into my office on the very first day to the man that's sitting before me is so remarkable, has taught me so much. It's been incredible. Really an absolute joy.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, sometimes I think back on that time and I'm like, how fortunate that I don't even know how I found you or how we found each other, but like a lot of the journey, I guess, I don't know that I would be sitting here today without that connection, you know? Something else, I think I mentioned it previously, and I don't know how much of this you remember, but there was a point in time where it was shortly after my divorce, and I think dad had his stroke at that point, but I don't remember for sure. And I was started taking Zoloft, and I got suicidal and had to quit taking it right away. And so, yeah, it's been a long, kind of scary at times journey. And I'm not sure I would be here. The other thing I remember is, do you remember me talking about how at one point I was talking about how I felt like I was on this island and everything I'd ever known or heard of was on this island. And then one day I decided I was going to climb on this raft and paddle out in the ocean. And now I'm in the middle of the ocean and the seas are turbulent. No idea where I'm going. Sometimes I just want to go back and and I know I can't go back and I have no idea where I'm going or what it's going to be like. And yeah.
I do remember that. I remember kind of terming it as being in the middle of the pond and you're walking on lily pads and you get to the middle and you look back and you go like, nope, can't do that. And you look ahead and goes, this looks so far away. And I remember the book, it was called Towards a New Awakening. That for me was really a helpful book. And in it, the gist was a man who had been wanting to go to holistic medical school and went and found out that it was really not that at all. And he joined a Buddhist Sangha, and he spent like almost a decade there. And then he started to see the cracks in a lot of sexual misbehavior and non-authentic, incongruent behavior, within the Buddhist community. And his conclusion was that you cannot, if you do your spiritual work without doing your ego work, you're not going to be truly a spiritual individual. And if you do your ego work without a spiritual influence, then your life is going to be empty. So you need both the spiritual and the ego work. And that is what you have so remarkably done. I was helpful in healing inner child wounds with you and helping you face the demons that were really nipping at your heels all the time in relationships, in business, like having to choose the hard path of integrity over the easier path, seemingly, of what you had used as constructs earlier. And it was long, hard work. And then the spiritual aspect came in, and between the work that we were doing, my own personal belief of spirituality uh, and alternative healing, just set you on this mission that far surpassed anything that I have. So I've learned a lot from you also. What you are today is a man who's done a lot of ego work, constantly seeking spiritual work, and you're your own healer now. You are a healer in your own right of what you are bringing to people in terms of alternatives to Western medication, which I do stand by Western medication in many ways. I think it's miraculous. And I stand by the alternative of psychedelic interventions and, the journeys, mushroom journeys, all the various ones that you described in your first podcast. So, you incorporate all of that, and that is an authentic healer, in my belief.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue into, you and I didn't work specifically with the psychedelic piece, but, our conversations and our work was my preparation for those psychedelic journeys that I would then go off and do either on my own or with someone. And then on the return piece, like the integration, like I could bring that what I experienced back into our conversations and our work. And even though I don't think you've ever worked with psychedelics, you were really good at helping me like bring those lessons into my life and change the way I showed up. And I think I still struggle a little bit with this, but how to incorporate that into my life because I spent 50 years living a different way and learning that way. sometimes it can be really challenging to say, like, how do I incorporate this into my life and my, the way I show up?
Well, something that we all struggle with. You're never done with your own personal healing work. And, it's like the slinky where you go forward and then you move back a little bit and you go forward and you feel yourself moving back and you get worried. And then you look back and go, but wait, this is how far I've come. And my going back is still way, way ahead of my going forward. So the integrative work that you have done has been very potent and necessary. And my suggestion for anybody that is venturing into the psychedelic healing world is that they have a therapist that helps them to do exactly what you're describing, to figure out, okay, I've had this huge awakening, but the ego work, as aforementioned, is essential in being able to really make the potency last. There's no magic pill bullet one experience in my belief system. I'm sure other people, we could have a great debate about it, and I would be so open for that. But I think it's the step by step building of that foundation that's so important. So if you have this very significant experience, but you lack knowing what your wounds are, what your history is, what your patterns are that you're trying to break through, then it's not going to be sustained.
I couldn't agree more. 100% agreement. It's a balance, and it's also like, what are you going to do with that information? Like, once you get it and you figure it out, like, what are you going to do with it? How does it integrate into your life? Um, there's so many. I think I could probably spend the entire hour and then a lot more time, just all of the little things that would come up that like would help me that along this journey. One of the ones I talk about a lot, and I'll ask you to kind of to describe it, but was the rings, the rings of the different relationships of
Yeah.
that's been so helpful and powerful. For Tell us about the rings.
Well, that takes a second, if that's okay. It's a concept that came to me in the middle of a session one day, which does happen. And this was decades ago. And, it was just that if you are the center of the planet, so, if you think of Saturn, here's the planet, and here are all the rings outside the planet, and then there's the galaxy. It is your essence is the core, which means your shadow, your light, all the things that make you a human being are right here. And then the first ring should have in it only the people that have earned the trust through experience and time to be able to be that close to your essential self. And then the next ring would be people that are almost that close, et cetera, until you've got your final ring. And that when I start working with people on Saturn's rings and I ask them to write the people who are in your life, where are they in your rings? And they often have who they want in their first ring in their rings. First of all, if there's more than two or three people in your first ring, there's probably one that may not actually qualify to be in that ring. But if you want a parent, if you want your parents, you're longing for a parent that is that first ring person, and you keep putting them there, and they actually appear as who they are in truth and can be deeply wounding. They have direct access to your core, beautiful, vulnerable self, and you get inflamed and upset and hurt and angry. So you throw your mom or your dad, off the galaxy or at the very end. And then time goes by and, things calm down and you put them right back in the first ring. So it's just this cycle of feeling close and connected and then being violated and throwing them off. Also, that first ring can often be occupied by who we think is well, I've just met my person. This is the person. And sometimes it is. I am certainly not suggesting that it isn't, but we put them in that first ring and we want them to be the person we believe that they are and what they're exposing in that very beginning is part of who they are. It's just a part that comes out when you're meeting somebody and you're just so flooded with all the wonderful feelings and hormones and everything that goes on. But it doesn't mean that they don't belong in your fifth ring, which is the ring that everybody goes in, the middle, when you first meet them. And only time and experience can bring them forward. So they might be, and you can still feel like, oh, I think it's my person, but so far, so good. Everything that I'm experiencing is great. They're still in my fifth ring. And after time and flu bugs and travel and life and disasters, you start to understand if this person really keeps showing up, that they belong where they are. But that takes a long time. So as you sort out in the rings, I'm doing a very condensed version in honor of your
You're doing
podcast.
great. I appreciate it. Yeah. I love this.
In order to sort out really where people belong in your rings, then there's a process of grieving and anger because they're not where you want them to be. And that's the truth. Once you we'll just continue with the parent model. If you put your parent in maybe the eighth ring, because they can be violent, they can be cruel, and they can also be loving and show up. Once you've grieved and accepted and grieved and accepted and done that whole process, that's really who they are, and you accept it, and you're hopeless that it can be any different, then you can take whatever good thing that does come out of it without, you've got a lot of protection. If it's, between your first ring and the eighth ring, there's a lot of space. So
Yeah.
you don't give them any more than you think that they could handle because you've learned what they can and can't handle. And so you have a lot of protection. And it's quite a process to do that. It's also, a system of what you give energetically to people. If you wake up and you have a lot of energy and somebody in your seventh ring said, can you do this, that, or the other? If everybody in your first rings are taken care of and you have that energy, then you have a yes. And if somebody in your first three rings needs you a lot, then you say, gosh, I'm so sorry, I can't do that today. So it's both energy out and what you let inside of you. And you can have people moving forward in your rings, and then something really big happens, and you're like, whoa. So you stop, figure out what is happening, and you move them back however many rings they need to. And they may recover from it and say, I cannot believe that I did that. I am so sorry. This is not going to happen again. And over time, they come back. However, if you've put them out and they say, I'm really sorry, this is never going to happen again, and it happens again, then you just continue moving them back.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for that. That's such a wonderful reminder. And I don't know that we've ever talked about it, but I love the fluidity, first of all. Like somebody can be in the first ring and then go out and like it can be very fluid, but it's something that I use on a very regular basis with everyone in my life. Like, are they in the right ring? Are they not in the right ring? Do they need to be pushed out? Can I pull them in a little bit? Like, where do they belong? And since we started working with that model of it's really become a key part of my relationships. And, I had this kind of come full circle in an ayahuasca ceremony where I had this vision of quantum entanglement where every soul on the planet is quantumly entangled with a celestial body in the cosmos. And, as something happens here, it happens there. And then there was this vision. It was a particular time, but, I saw this black hole and it was sucking in the entire galaxy, was just sucking it in. And it really struck home to me about how important it is to like identify those black holes in our lives and push them out so they can't suck in the whole galaxy. Because if we get too close to them, they'll pull everything in.
Yeah. I remember you being in romantic relationships where that was happening over and over and over again. And I felt like I was holding on to your shirt and pulling you back. And then, you would make your decisions and your choices, and it took a long time, but it was you were the one that ended up being able to make it through, to leave the vortex, and that was so powerful. That was a very, very powerful turning point for you.
Yeah, I think that's in that same journey. I think you and I've talked a little bit about this, but I went to I'd gone to Hoffman, and Hoffman had taught us about had taught me about having a happy place, and my happy place was this wildflower meadow in Crested Butte, and so that was always my happy place going through Hoffman, and I carried that with me. And during that ayahuasca journey, I found myself standing in the middle of that meadow, and in the tree line there were people, but I didn't know who those people were, but I knew that they were coming forward. And my mother was the first one to walk across the meadow. And as my mother approached, a opaque screen dropped between us. And I looked, and we both had like half light and half dark, like energy. And as our life played out on the screen, our hands would move forward, and we would start to exchange this energy based on what was going on the screen.
Wow.
Then several other people came up, and then one person in particular, as they approached, they were like all like dark, and I can kind of feel the terror that I experienced of like, oh my God, this is going to be tough. And immediately both of my hands move forward, and they start sucking light out of me. And I'm watching my body turn dark. And I'm like, holy crap, what's going to happen? And I kept hearing, use your shield, use your shield. And I remember screaming out loud. I think I screamed it in the middle of the ceremony with everybody else. I'm like, use my shield. And all of a sudden it severs one side, and it sucks a bunch of light back into my body. And then the connection ends. And so that's kind of like that ring theory of like moving, it kind of plays together there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've got
Um,
chills.
yeah, it was, and but it all comes like full circle. Like I think that's one of the points I wanted to make is like how important having that ego work with a therapist is to help relate some of these experiences in that altered state. Because if you don't have that ego work or that therapist that can help, like, what does that mean? Like, I don't think I would have understood what that meant if I didn't have that idea of the rings and the movement and all of that. So, yeah, it's super, super powerful.
I
So,
want to
where do,
remark also at this moment of your integration into being able to just be so present with your feelings and so raw. And that was not always the case. Like I have all of these images of you flashing through my mind at various times of being just really tough and angry, big, lots and lots and lots of anger. And here you are, just so open in front of your audience and so able to access that feeling and let other people in. You that is the joy of my being a witness to you, because I understand the monumental
yeah,
task that it took. And for anybody that's just meeting you right now to be able to say, I can never even cry. I mean, he's just talking, and then he's crying, and then he's talking some more, and then he's laughing. Like, I don't even imagine myself ever getting there. And so I'm to all those of you that are going to see this and see Phil being able to just move from one part of himself to another so beautifully and authentically, that was a lot of work, of many, many, many years of sessions with me, sessions with other healers, with intuitives and past life regressions, and a multitude of things that you can be this person that you're witnessing in Phil. And it takes a commitment. And he is somebody that could really give you so much insight on what it is like to be hard cased in anger, resentment, bitterness, protection to what you're experiencing now. So, for anybody that will be watching this, know the gift that Phil has to offer in that.
Yeah, thank you. Um, it definitely, yeah, it hasn't been a short journey, but it's been beautiful and magical. I sometimes talk about growing up in Oklahoma. There was this saying about taking the long way around the barn. And I think of that a lot of times with this journey. It's like, when at first I thought, well, I'm here and all I got to do is get to the other side of the barn. And if I go straight across, I'll be there. But there is no path that's straight across. You have to go around the outside. And sometimes it's pretty dark and scary, but oftentimes it's beautiful and magical. And I would oftentimes land at a spot and I would look around and I would say, I didn't even know this was possible. Like, that's why we have to take the long way around, because that's how you appreciate the journey. And that's what this is all about. It's about the journey. It's not about getting to the other side of the barn, because we're all going to get to the other side of the barn and we know what the other side of the barn is, right? That's the end. So it's just relax and enjoy the journey around the barn, and it'll be beautiful and magical, and people will show up on that journey when you least expect them, and they'll have, a lot of wisdom and guidance that, what it was just shocking and amazing. Some of that. I was going somewhere with this.
I'm reminded of my term equifinality, Phil, when you talk about that. And equifinality just means that there's a million paths to the same end point, and that somebody else's experience may be very different than yours. It may be a little bit more linear. It may start out linear and then zigzag across. Everybody's going to get to wherever they are seeking, wanting, if they're open to that process. You have to start on the path, however, in order to
Yes.
get there. You have to put one foot in front of the other and trust that whatever your particular equifinality path is, it's going to get you there. You just have to be open to the possibilities of it and buckle your seatbelt for the parts that are like, I don't think I chose this. I can remember in my own therapy work being just dissolved in a moment of extreme pain and just so torn apart. And my therapist looked at me and she said, "You have worked so hard to get to this point." And I was like, well, I really didn't know it was going to get me here. I don't think that I signed up for that because I thought I was going to go to therapy and be like Mary Tyler Moore and wake up in the morning and throw my hat in the air, say, "Good morning, world. It's a new day." And, that's definitely not A, who I am, not a morning person, and B, how therapy works or how the healing process works. So it's about having faith and trust in what you don't.
Yeah, that reminds me of like the idea of like, I think when I first met you, my existence was from here up. Like, I didn't feel anything in my body. I didn't know what it was like to have feelings and where those feelings came from. And then through the work, and I was able to get out of my head and into my body. And I feel like that's a pretty common theme with a lot of people, is like we tend to live in our heads mostly, and we don't know how to get into our bodies and feel things and make decisions from our heart or our gut. As a matter of fact, I feel like oftentimes, uh, as children, at least for me, I was discouraged from feeling those things in my heart or in my gut. Uh, and those end up being some of the most powerful feelings, is to be able to feel it in my body and in my heart.
There's a therapist in Boulder who had a saying. I went to a seminar that she did. And what I came out with in the strongest of ways was she just said, you should never make a decision only from your head or only from your heart. You need to use your head and your heart to make a full decision. And that has stuck with me and borne a lot of truth. I mean, there are times when your heart is like screaming at you to make this choice. And if you include your head in the process, you may have at least maybe say, okay, she or he's still in my fifth ring. So that's the head part, being able to remind that huge feeling body that, okay, you could be 100% right, but let's just take our time. So it's that kind of combination, or your head is like really strong. And if you check in with your heart and your heart's going, no, no. And the head be, all right, I'll listen to you. What do you have to say? Go ahead. So I think that's an important thing for people to consider.
Yeah, in the medicine world, it's often referred to as I'm going to sit with that for a little while. And sitting with it is I'm going to get my heart and my head lined up together and make that, you know, I'll align those two so that I can have an align, whether it's a perspective on something or a decision or whatever that might be. Yeah, I think another piece that maybe I thought we would touch on is I remember being so like hasty and trying to force everything. Like every decision was forced and I gotta do it. And like as I progressed, I was able to spend more time to to respond instead of react to things. Um, and oh, I remember where I was going a while ago. So you talked about that anger and frustration, and reminds me of one of the times I was doing some men's work with um Eli, and we were releasing pent up anger and frustration, and it was this exercise, and we were doing it as a group, and I was half-assing it. I was pretty scared, and I'd spent a lifetime bottling up all this anger and hurt, and Eli comes over and he says, "Phil, I know you got more than that." And I looked at him and I said, "Eli, if I let it all out, like we'll never get it back in. Like it took me forever to learn how to do that." And he just looks at me with this puzzled look on his face and he's like, "Why would we put it in? We're trying to get it out. We don't want to put it back in." And I'm like, "Holy shit, that's an option? I can like let it go and not put it back in?" Yeah. So another piece of the whole journey.
Yeah, it's scary to let go of
Oh
something
my goodness.
that has served you in some way, even if it's served you in a way that doesn't make sense. It did make sense at the beginning of the decision. You know, when we're little kids, we have our little tool chest of who we are, and we have a sense of what we need to use in order to get through our life at that time. And we throw all the rest out. We disown the parts of ourselves that don't seem to work. And in your case, especially, you know, how many kids were in your family, and, you know, parents that were babies when they started having babies, and, you know, financial struggle and super religious background. You know, you were like, okay, what do I have in here? I can be funny and I can be tough. So you chose funny and tough. And that really worked for a long time. It got you through a lot of stuff until it didn't. But it's hard to let go of the thing that protected you, and to let your vulnerability, which is your sweet spot, your heart, your gentleness, which you have such abundance of, that was not going to serve you in a family with 10 kids. How many kids?
9 kids.
Nine kids. I mean, nine kids. It's like, holy cow. It was going to be trampled and killed. So that was like disowned, and it took you a long time to bring all those fragmented parts back into yourself, and to be able to use different aspects in your voice along with the ones that you use to be tough and angry and protective of your core self.
Yeah, that uh those pieces were were survival. Like those tools that I used as a kid were the only reasons I survived that. Yeah, so a little on that for the listeners. I was the third of 9 children. I was born on my mother's 21st birthday. So her first child, I think my sister Tanya was born. My mom was either 17 or 18. And then pretty much every year after that, my mom had another child. And yeah, there was no, she was a baby. My father was, I think, a year or two older than my mom. They were both babies when they had babies and a very religious upbringing. And so, yeah, we were all born at home. And so those tools were like the tools that I survived by. And to let those tools go or stop using them was a fear of like death. Because if I let these go, I'm gonna die. I won't be accepted by anybody because these are the tools that, you know, how I fit in and how I survived. And so it was super scary. And then learning that, I could retire those tools and pick up some other ones that suited me. And those tools were still available should I need them. Like it's not like I can't ever use them again. Like if the opportunity presents itself where they're the right tools, I can use them. So it
Mm.
became this like, really identifying the tools and what they're for. I sometimes talk about like, it's like they were plumbing tools and I was a plumber and now I'm an electrician and the plumbing tools aren't going to serve me very well trying to do electric work. Um, but at some point I might need to do some plumbing so I can go get those plumbing tools. It's kind of like that. The tools that worked for that phase of my life don't work in this phase. And just learning what those new tools are and how to use them has been a big part of the journey as well.
Yep.
And trying them out, like, doesn't always fit. It's kind of like,
Mhm.
sometimes you get the wrong wrench, you think it's a half inch, and it ends up being a 9/16, and then your dad throws the wrench back at you. I talked about that a little bit in the first episode of like holding the light. And I don't know if I said that, like, if I gave him the wrong one, he would throw it back at me and have a few choice words for me. And I was just trying to hold the light and help, hence the reason one of the things I talk about today is like, I'm just here to hold the light for other people and help them, shine the light on their path and help them figure out which tools that might be the right tools to use and identify different paths and things like that.
One of the things that also was hilariously and not was that you were born so adorable and so cute with red hair. And then, that continued. And in school, your looks were a very big, potent part of who you were, along with being funny and being really tough guy. You had that whole illusion. So it's like every aspect has a light and a shadow. And it just depends on how you're using them and how they operate. So, your good looks and your charm went a really long way. But then there was that fear of being discovered that I'm really a shit on the inside. So just keep looking at me. And, you would attract people, men and women, who were attracted to those parts of you. And that other part of you was like, no, you're not going to actually know me. So happily, your wonderful, handsome self is still wonderfully handsome, but along with it comes the congruity of the inside self.
Yeah, that alignment. Again, back to the alignment of and letting the authentic me out instead of like suppressing it. Yeah, and there's always that wounded inner child. Right now I'm listening to reading a book called Iron John and he talks about Every man can tell you the wound that they received from their father and when it occurred and what it was. And to, to bring that inner wounded child into alignment with, who I am today, and to have that, to allow that child to have that voice to express that hurt and anger, and then align it like in psychedelic work is to integrate it, like, to integrate it into life. That's a huge piece of it. How are we doing on time? What else comes up, Randy?
You just threw the ball at me, huh?
Well, yeah, I wasn't sure how much time we had, so I wanted to check. Sounds like we got like 10, 15 minutes left. So what's next? I don't think we touched on the default mode network much, but you and I haven't talked a whole lot about default mode network, have we? And those windows and peer. Yeah, I think we could probably dive in a little bit. Maybe it makes sense to dive a little bit into, like, when we first started seeing each other, I was in, well, at least at some point shortly thereafter, is when I was already in EO, got into YPO, was running a very successful construction company, and there was a lot of imposter syndrome. We dealt with that quite a bit of, like, and I feel like that's relatively common, but it was definitely the case for me of, like, feeling like an imposter and that I didn't belong and that I wasn't worthy, and some of those types of feelings. Do you remember that phase of
And
the journey? Yeah.
it's also when, the I have a theory that we've talked about called the trash compactor. And when I was first married, we lived in an apartment in Lakewood, and then this townhouse came open on Monaco called 1000 South Monaco. It was a very cool address. And so this woman had owned it and she was getting married and was going to rent it out. So we applied and she liked us. And so we got to be at 1000 South Monaco. So she's taking us around and she's showing us this and that. And then we're in the kitchen. She said, "This is a trash compactor." And I'm like, "Trash compactor? I've never even heard of that. What is a trash compactor?" She goes, "Well, it makes the trash, small." So I thought that's really cool. So on we go. And maybe 3 weeks into it, maybe a little bit longer, the trash compactor wasn't working. And I'm like, "Gosh, that's so weird." So I called the woman who owned it and was renting us the townhouse. And I said, "The trash compactor is not working." And so I explained what was happening. She goes, "Well, have you emptied it?" And I'm like, "Empty a trash compactor? Isn't that what they're for? Why do you have to empty a trash compactor?" And it's like, duh, because it only can go so far. So we as human beings are a human trash compactor, and we have a lot of space to put all of that trash in. And we use our tools that we have, in your case, your humor, your adorable looks, your toughness, all of that. And that can go for a really long time, and people can have really big trash compactors. But what happens is that at some point, inevitably, the trash compactor is full and it has to be emptied out
Mm.
in order to be effective. And so that means that things are just not working. So when you were in that stage of your life of being a successful entrepreneur, business owner in EO, which you might explain, EO is a kind of an exclusive men's organization of high-powered executives. Is that accurate enough?
Well, they don't claim it to be men's exclusive, but it's an entrepreneurs organization. Most of the members are male. And then YPO is Young Presidents Organization. Both, pretty high level, top 1% of business owners in YPO and maybe top 5% are NEO. So pretty
Yeah.
exclusive and
Yeah.
very masculine dominated
And
groups.
very successful, lots of money floating around. And I think that your fears of being exposed and of feeling like a fraud were so escalated at that point because here are all these other guys that are also, many of them, I would guarantee, also feeling like frauds, but never letting that out. Nobody was talking about that. So the things that you were using stopped working, and you kind of
Yes.
got yourself into trouble in various ways. That rebellious, tough guy mode pissed people off, and it ended up being very conflictive. The business started having some problems because you grew it to such a big point, and all of your previous tools weren't working. So we were working together at that point in time, and we would let a little bit out of the trash compactor, and there'd be a little bit of room, and so we do a little bit of growth, and then it would get full again. So the emptying of the trash compactor is what leaves you space to develop more of yourself, to have more of yourself available. And people do not do this willingly. The trash compactor has to be really stuffed and misfiring, and everything that you try that used to work keeps not trying, and you keep digging yourself in deeper and deeper. I shouldn't say you, a person, one does that.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what you were describing before is you have to start figuring that out, not the decompensation. Is that what you were talking about?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's sort of all the same
And
story.
yeah, it adds a whole new meaning to the term take out the trash.
Yeah.
And we all resist taking out the trash, right? I'm the first one to like push it down. I can get another can in here. I can get some more trash in here. Yeah. I think I was still married when we first started talking, right? It was the
No,
very end of the marriage, or
I
had I
think
already
you
gotten divorced?
just barely divorced.
Yeah, I think that, yeah. So, yeah, that was it's more of the trash that was in there, right? Was that
A lot of relationship trash in
failed,
there.
yeah, failed marriage? Yes. Relationships have been a big part of our work together.
And also for the viewer out there and the listeners, Phil's healing has brought forth such healing in his family. Like he is the one in his family that could bring healing to the generational trauma. And he had a daughter from his first wife right out of the military. And that all was a very sticky, difficult part. And in this whole long healing process, Phil and his daughter have become extremely close. He has two grandsons now, very active in their lives, very present, teaching them new ways to be male, to have feelings, to explore and be free, but also to choose freedom through discipline. And it's so beautiful to see that. You have been in you were the chosen healing agent, as there usually is one in every generation. But that's not good news or bad news. It's just like you either do it or you don't. But if you choose to take on that challenge of being the designated healer in a family, you change the generations afterwards. And that is what is happening right now.
Thank you for bringing that to the light. Yeah. Yeah. What a blessing. And I remember the turning point where, you know, we worked together to establish some boundaries between my daughter Kayla and I remember thinking and probably verbalized like, what if she never talks to me again? And I got to the point where I was like, it can't continue the way it is. So I had to take that chance. And man, what a magical turn of events. And I'm going in next month, October 15th. I'm headed to Oklahoma where they live for Grandparents' Day. And those two little boys just, yeah, teaching them to meditate. I taught Mason about the power of thought and magic the last time I was with them. And it's just been such a blessing. And without this work, I wouldn't have those relationships.
Yeah.
Like they wouldn't exist. And
Kayla had you on a very far out ring. you had betrayed a lot of trust. And Phil, you have slowly, without pressing, without pushing, you just kept showing up and showing up. And she kept moving you in a ring again. And she also violated trust with you. It was a very mutual, we have to figure this out and build trust with each other. But this did not happen in a grand gesture or in a short amount of time. This has been a decade in the making of the healing of the father-daughter relationship, and now the wonderful multi-generational experience is happening in that family, and it's just, yeah, so powerful and
Yeah.
so awesome. Probably a good place to stop.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you so much. I love you. I appreciate you. I wouldn't be here without you. And yes, thank you for being my mentor, my guide, my therapist, and all of the things. I truly appreciate it.
And thank you for teaching me what you've taught me, which I pass on to other people. So it's a
Yeah.
lovely exchange of everything. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks for joining me for this first step of the journey. If something you heard today resonated, inspired, or stirred something in you, share this episode with someone you care about. And if you're ready to go deeper into your healing or transformation, visit elanvitalmentoring.com to learn more or connect with me directly. Until next time, stay present, stay grounded, and trust the force within you.